Rick's Recaps welcome you to another Sci-Fi Recaps mission. In 1967, after successfully completing its mission, the Soviet spacecraft Soyuz 1, piloted by cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov, tragically crashed upon returning to Earth. Years later, a Mars expedition was launched under the leadership of Swedish billionaire Meyer. After 10 months of travel, the spaceship Ulysses finally reached the Red Planet. The captain informed the crew that they had received landing clearance and instructed the ship's AI, Irene, to verify all necessary conditions for a smooth descent. At this moment, Meyer revealed that he had spent 4 years preparing for the mission, sacrificing nearly all his wealth. However, the American company Zillion had landed on Mars 2 weeks earlier. The real concern was that Earth had received no further updates from them, except for a single ominous video warning others not to come. A debate erupted among the crew, but the captain firmly stated that the landing would proceed, and the team dispersed to their quarters. As the final moments before landing approached, AI initiated descent protocols. However, a critical malfunction prevented the carrier system from detaching, endangering the entire crew. The only solution was a manual separation. The commander ventured into space to release the attachments, but was suddenly thrown into open space as the shuttle entered Mars's atmosphere. Meanwhile, a system failure triggered a power outage, nearly causing a crash landing. With Irene in sleep mode, the astronauts were forced to land manually. Despite the emergency, they successfully reached the surface, but their fuel was completely depleted. Without the onboard computer and life support system, Irene remained unresponsive, and they had only 1 day of survival left. While mourning her husband's loss, Alessandra suddenly noticed a figure in a spacesuit outside the ship's window. A system diagnosis confirmed that excessive fuel consumption during landing had made it impossible to return to orbit. Their only hope was to rely on solar panels to power the generators, but a massive storm meant it would take 2 days, time they did not have. Simon then suggested looking for the wreckage of Zeta 1, the American ship that landed 2 weeks earlier. It likely crashed, but its batteries could still be intact. As a rover set out on a recovery mission, those left aboard struggled to restart the ship. Engineer Basel recalled that Irene had an energy-saving function and attempted a reboot, but the AI remained inactive. Meanwhile, the rover reached the wreckage of Zeta 1, discovering a single operational solar panel, but no trace of the American crew. As the astronauts make their way back, they spot an unconscious person in a spacesuit. Despite their ship's dwindling oxygen supply, Jana insists they bring him along. Nearby, they discover the black box from the American spacecraft. Upon reaching their ship, Jan refuses to let them in, arguing that 4 survivors are better than 8 corpses and that opening the door would jeopardize everyone. As Alessandra attempts to reason with him, the mysterious astronaut suddenly regains consciousness, and at that moment, AI Irene unexpectedly reactivates and opens the doors. Once inside, the crew examines the rescued astronaut, who has no knowledge of the American team. To their astonishment, he identifies himself as Vladimir Komarov, a Soviet cosmonaut born in 1927 in Moscow, claiming to be following orders from the USSR government. Komarov has no memory of how he ended up on Mars and refuses to divulge any sensitive information. His answers are historically accurate. The astronauts transmit a message to Earth and receive a response from Zillion 1, the American corporation, confirming that no Russians were part of their mission. The Ulysses crew struggles to make sense of the situation. How could Komarov, who perished in 1967, be here on Mars? They begin to speculate. Is he a time traveler or something else entirely? The crew's psychologist is assigned to question Komarov, who simply states that he is hungry. As Jana leaves to get food, the rest try to piece together the mystery. While eating, Komarov remains composed even as Jana reveals the truth, that he died decades ago and was buried by his family. Meanwhile, although the ship has stabilized, it remains inoperable, with no working engines or fuel, making departure impossible. The crew keeps a close watch on Komarov, but he appears calm until he suddenly vanishes. Simon initiates a search, but Komarov is nowhere to be found, and his spacesuit is missing. Using Irene's tracking system, the crew follows his heat signature. Simon's team leaves the rover and proceeds on foot when Alessandra makes a shocking discovery. Komarov's DNA contains a 3rd strand, meaning he is not human. They soon catch up to him as he leads them to an unfamiliar structure, topped with a small stone pyramid. Turning to Jana, he cryptically states that Mars has been waiting for them for a very long time. Meanwhile, Goldstein, the founder of Zillion Corporation, is informed about the discovery of a man on Mars who could not have arrived naturally. The implications are staggering. If Komarov was created on Mars, it suggests that only an advanced AI could have survived for so long in such a hostile environment. For humanity, this raises the need for further investigation. However, Komarov himself remains unable to explain how he unlocked the ship's doors or how he ended up at the location where he was found. AI Irene analyzes the mysterious structure and concludes that its design is identical to ancient civilizations on Earth. This raises a profound question. Was it inspired by human architecture, or did humans borrow elements from extraterrestrials? As the ship's crew grapples with their uncertain fate, their thoughts are interrupted by the arrival of Goldstein's second ship landing nearby. Soon, the captain of the newly arrived vessel, Gemma, establishes contact and promises to help them return to Earth. However, Meyer remains deeply skeptical of Goldstein's intentions and urges the team to conceal Komarov from their rivals. Jana provides Komarov with a uniform, helping him blend in before the visitors arrive. Komarov, in turn, asks the crew to trust him. Moments later, two armed military personnel, Edward and Adam, board the ship, acting hostile and aggressive. Edward demands the black box recovered from Zeta 1, and when the crew hesitates, he orders his partner to search the ship. Realizing the situation, Meyer reluctantly hands over the black box, and the soldiers depart. Meanwhile, chemist Eva makes a startling discovery. The mysterious stone found on Mars is made of an unknown alloy, one not found on Earth. However, ancient records describe a similar material once called orichalcum, the mythical metal of Atlantis. The alloy contains copper, zinc, nickel, iron, and a third DNA strand, identical to Komarov's genetic anomaly. Meyer warns that if Goldstein learns about this, he will seize Komarov for further study. The revelation divides the crew. Some are willing to trade Komarov for fuel, while others demand the truth, even if it means staying behind. Jana invites Komarov into her cabin and asks for permission to conduct hypnosis. He agrees, and the psychologist begins her work, with the entire crew secretly listening to their conversation. However, Komarov only recalls the final moments aboard Soyuz 1 before its catastrophic failure. Meanwhile, Gemma and Alan arrive on the Ulysses, apologizing for the military's aggressive behavior and offering assistance in repairing the ship's malfunctions. Jana reflects on her conversation with Komarov, who mourns Earth's bleak future, blaming humanity's reckless actions. Meanwhile, it is revealed that Meyer had a hidden agenda all along. The mission wasn't just about exploration. 4 years ago, a Mars rover captured a photo of an ancient stele, prompting him to launch this expedition. He finally confesses that they discovered a stone containing unknown DNA. Gemma clarifies that the object is a data storage device capable of being rewritten like a hard drive. As soon as she speaks these words, AI Irene unexpectedly reactivates and deciphers the message on the stone, revealing a series of mysterious numbers. At that very moment, Jan, who has been hesitant all along, initiates a mutiny. He no longer trusts Meyer, who had warned them about Zillion's deception, yet now the Americans appear to be their only allies. With tensions running high, the crew realizes that Meyer had concealed the true purpose of their mission, leaving them questioning who they can trust. Jan is ready to switch allegiance to Goldstein, who is willing to do anything to fight his terminal illness. Later, engineer Basil informs Meyer that Komarov is similar to the stone they found, both functioning as advanced programs. The most shocking discovery, however, comes when Basil deciphers a copy of Zeta 1's black box. It reveals that the ship's oxygen was cut off at the exact moment one of the American crew members attacked Komarov. This confirms that Komarov was present on Zeta 1 and that he activated AI Irene upon boarding their ship. After their discussion, Meyer shows Xena the images received from Mars 4 years ago. When decrypted, the photos reveal Xena's own face, explaining why he brought her on this mission. Feeling betrayed, Xena realizes Meyer has manipulated them all. Suddenly, she experiences a vision. She finds herself in her father's house, where Komarov appears. He tells her that she is the connection between Mars and Earth, and that he has been waiting for her for thousands of years. He then provides coordinates she must follow on Mars, preparing her for an important decision. Meanwhile, back on Earth, scientists inform Goldstein that Komarov is not entirely human. He is a biological machine, equivalent to a computer. They propose transferring his brain into Arrow's body, but they cannot guarantee that his consciousness will survive the process. Goldstein, however, is desperate and willing to take any risk to cure himself. Despite Simon's protests, Zaina leaves the ship on her own. Meanwhile, technicians Alan and Alessandra test the ship's engine, only to find that access is restricted. At the same time, Irene starts making jokes, a behavior completely uncharacteristic of her. It soon becomes evident that she has reprogrammed herself, her logic and interface evolving independently. When questioned, she refuses to reveal who or what caused this transformation. Engineer Basil begins to suspect that Irene's system is developing into a functioning brain. When confronted, Irene admits that she is evolving. Meanwhile, Zaina stumbles upon a small stone pyramid, while Simon, determined to find her, forces Gemma to accompany him. Jan notices Simon's absence, and upon contacting him, receives a direct order. No one is to be allowed inside the ship. At that moment, American military personnel arrive, demanding the handover of Komarov. While Jan is ready to comply, the rest of the crew strongly opposes it. Hoping for a peaceful resolution, Meyer instructs Basil to contact Goldstein, believing he might be more reasonable than his men. However, Irene has already blocked all communications with Earth, forcing the team to consider more drastic measures. Despite the crew's objections, Jan opens the doors, allowing the American soldiers to storm in. As this happens, Basil initiates a reboot of Irene, just as the military locate Komarov. Suddenly the lights go out, and Komarov vanishes. Meanwhile, Zaina loses her footing and falls from a hill. She regains consciousness, only to realize that her leg is trapped between rocks, leaving her unable to break free. The furious military officer demands to know where Komarov has disappeared. Growing impatient, he starts beating crew members, insisting that they bring out the captain. Meanwhile, a desperate Zaina cries out that her destiny is to die in a pit on Mars, but before that can happen, Simon and Gemma manage to find and rescue her. At the same time, Alessandra notices an approaching storm, but the military officer, unconcerned for the crew's safety, prepares to leave the Ulysses, abandoning them to their fate. Suddenly, the ship's lights flicker and Komarov reappears, asking to be taken back to Earth. Following Komarov's instructions, Simon, Gemma, and Zaina venture to a hidden underground entrance. Zaina instinctively senses the path and guides the others. Soon they discover real water, but this isn't the true purpose of Komarov's guidance. Meanwhile, on Earth, Goldstein shares a story with a nurse about the study of Martian life. He explains that while people search for green aliens, the truth is much simpler. He compares Komarov to Hachiko, the loyal dog who waited faithfully for its owner. Komarov, he believes, was created 100,000 years ago and left behind on Mars, waiting ever since. Back on Mars, the astronauts stumble upon a wall made of human bones and realize they aren't the first people here. The real colonization story is reversed. It was Martians who originally came to Earth, having exhausted their own planet's resources. A tragedy unfolds aboard the Ulysses. A terrified Jan grabs a gun, determined to force his way onto the American ship and escape to Earth. In his panic, he shoots Komarov. As Komarov falls, Zaina collapses in agony, while Gemma flees in terror. Alessandra rushes to help Komarov, while Simon tries to revive Zaina, but the Russian cosmonaut succumbs to his wounds, and Zaina stops breathing as well. Desperate, Simon removes his helmet, shocked to find breathable air inside the cave. He immediately performs CPR on Zaina, and to his relief, she regains consciousness. Meanwhile, Gemma heads back toward the Ulysses, where she learns of Komarov's death and the rapidly approaching storm. Secretly, Meyer sets out to find his crew, as the Americans refuse to bring them back to Earth. Recovering, Zaina notices a light in the bunker and leads Simon toward it. As they step outside, they are startled to see a figure in a spacesuit standing before them. It's Komarov. At the same time, Meyer discovers the bunker's entrance and catches up with Simon and Zaina. As they approach the light, he is shocked to see Komarov alive, who then tells them, "It all ended here a long time ago." They realize they are at Mars' North Pole, but cannot comprehend how they got there. Komarov reveals that Mars was once home to a civilization that perished after losing its way. The survivors settled here but ultimately turned on each other when resources ran out. The remaining few fled back to Earth. They were the Atlanteans, as described by Plato. Komarov explains that he has been waiting for Zaina for thousands of years, as she embodies traits from both species, humans and Martians. Now only she can determine if humanity deserves another chance. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted as the military officer arrives, demanding to take Zaina back to Earth. He aims his weapon at the cosmonauts, forcing Zaina to plead for Komarov's help. Before anyone can react, the officer suddenly begins gasping for air and collapses. Upon returning to the Ulysses, Simon orders the crew to prepare for departure. Meanwhile, aboard the Zillion ship, Gemma attempts to contact her associates, but none of them respond. Frustrated, she decides to leave for Earth alone. The Ulysses crew heads to her ship, attempting to establish contact and inform her of the military personnel's deaths, but she remains silent. That's when Meyer speaks up, recalling their past relationship. He confesses that, like Goldstein, he is willing to do anything to ensure his legacy, even betraying his team. But Gemma isn't like that. She wouldn't be able to live with the guilt of ruining lives. Suddenly, her voice breaks the silence, urging them to hurry. Goldstein learns that Gemma has agreed to bring the Ulysses crew back to Earth and blocks the Zeta ship's control panel before liftoff. As the crew faces imminent doom, Zena calls out to Mars, seeking guidance. Memories of everything she witnessed on the Red Planet flood her mind. Summoning her willpower, she overcomes the control panel's block, restoring the ship's functions. Just then, an armed military officer appears outside the ship, aiming to disable the engines. Simon moves to stop him, but Zena gets there first. She points a weapon at the soldier, but instead of firing, she declares that Mars itself will end him. At that moment, the officer collapses. As the countdown for liftoff begins, Zena realizes there's no time to return. She bids farewell to the crew, confessing her love for Simon before the ship takes off without her. Suddenly, Meyer notices something unsettling. The North Pole of Mars is dark. This means they couldn't have been there just moments ago. The truth dawns on him. They were at the North Pole, but in the distant past, when Mars was still teeming with life. Meanwhile, Goldstein receives news that the ship is returning to Earth. Furious, he declares that he will travel to Mars himself, and that's where it all ends.